Our protagonist, Aoba, is a talented athlete, but on this very first day of the new semester, he oversleeps rushing to school with just 10 minutes to spare. Miraculously, he makes it just in time only to discover that his seat has been changed. Now he finds himself sitting next to a girl named Hina, who has just returned from abroad. She seems distant and indifferent to everyone around her. Aoba worries that he has made a poor impression. Suddenly, Hina becomes flustered when she catches him staring, causing her to drop her eraser. Aoba tosses it back to her, but in the chaos, she stumbles and falls only to be caught by Aoba, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment while he remains unfazed. Intrigued by her aloofness, he wishes to understand her better, yet their moment is interrupted by the teacher, as both of them seem to be preoccupied during class. Aoba's friends are curious about what's brewing between him and Hina, sensing an air of mystery. Hina has been noticing Aoba ever since he arrived, her attention caught by his presence. Meanwhile, one of Aoba's friends approaches Hina, sharing his story of a basketball injury that Aoba helped him overcome. This moment of encouragement reignited his passion for school and sports. He wonders aloud if Hina might actually like Aoba, but she hesitates to answer. Just then, Hina's device alerts her to a looming danger outside the sky darkens as a robot descends from the heavens piloted by someone from the future with Aoba in its crosshairs. The group receives a warning but dismisses it as a mistake. Suddenly, the robot heads straight for the school, aiming its weapon at Aoba. In a panic, he and his friends flee, but two of them are left behind as the robot seems fixated solely on Aoba. Its targeting system, however, is faulty and runs out of ammo, quickly forcing the pilot to switch to a sword and chase Aoba down. In a desperate bid to escape, Aoba hops on his bike and weaves through narrow alleys trying to evade the robot's strikes. Just when he thinks he's alone, he encounters Hina, who urges him to follow her into a nearby warehouse. Inside, she activates her own robot, ready to fight back. Aoba watches in awe as Hina commands her machine, launching a counterattack against the pursuing robot. Confusion fills Aoba's mind. Why is she putting herself in danger for him? Hina pays no heed to his thoughts, charging forward and severing one of the robot's arms. With a determined glare, she aims her weapon and fires, taking down the assailant. She promises to reveal the truth, but her words are heavy with implications. Both she and the pilot are from the future. She travelled back to protect him, and when she saw they would be seated together, her heart swelled with joy. Hina has been watching Aoba because she knows that one day the pilot would seek him out. Aoba's future self had warned her of this event. Now, believing her mission has come to an end, Hina wishes for Aoba to continue living his life as normal. But just when it seems they're safe, the pilot rises again, lunging at Hina's robot in a desperate attempt to self-destruct and take her with him. She cannot escape and lifts off into the air, taking him along to find the breach that brought him here, determined to return both of them to the future. Hina reaches the breach just in time, but as it closes, both she and the pilot are caught in its crushing force. Before departing, she tells Aoba that they will meet again, and urges him to seek out someone named Dio when he reaches the future. Now, Aoba finds himself inside a giant robot awakening in the midst of a fierce battle. The controlling team notices the robot he is in, responding to him syncing with the presence of Dio. Aoba suddenly called out Hina's name, causing the robot to react and grant him control. Prior to this, Dio and his team were trapped in a fierce battle, determined to fight on despite their comrades falling around them. They devised a counter-strategy, planning to strike first at the sight of enemy movement, knowing that the ensuing chaos was their ally. Just then, Aoba's robot awakened, and the control room personnel questioned him about the situation, wanting to clarify his identity. When he revealed his name, they mistakenly thought he was part of the research lab and urged him to leave the battlefield. Confused about how to escape, Aoba was told to remain still and prepare to take responsibility. However, the captain, after hearing the battlefield report, allowed Aoba to fully synchronize with Dio. If left unchecked, Aoba's robot would be rendered useless and fall into enemy hands. Through synchronization, Aoba could absorb the knowledge of a pro, and he was willing to take responsibility for any security issues that might arise. They knew that if this continued, everyone would be in danger. The commander accepted the plan and authorized the synchronization, instructing Aoba to follow Dio's commands closely. Meanwhile, the enemy began advancing, targeting Aoba, while the rest bombarded their ship. Dio attempted to lure as many enemies as possible onto himself, urging Aoba to follow his lead to activate the synchronization. Just then, Aoba was stunned when the very person Hina had told him to find appeared before him unexpectedly. Quickly, he followed Dio's instructions and activated the synchronization. Their minds linked, they powered up their robots, which became faster and stronger. They took charge, dealing with airborne enemies, leaving both AI and Dio astonished. Aoba was also surprised, realizing he was now piloting the robot that charged ahead. Suddenly, he experienced a series of prophetic visions guiding him to draw his sword and retaliate. The synchronization rate soared, doubling Dio's power. Aoba fought as if he were a seasoned pilot, pushing back an enemy who tried to overwhelm him. Just when he was about to be attacked, the visions returned, allowing him to dodge and counterattack. With a single strike, he severed the enemy's weapon. The remaining 4 enemy fighters began to retreat, unwilling to waste lives. As the command ship was shot down, the remaining foes withdrew, giving the command team a moment to breathe. They managed to escape the onslaught for now. After landing, Aoba struggled to figure out how to exit the robot, but stumbled upon AI's hairpin inside. The robot was subsequently opened by Dio, who aimed his gun, demanding to know Aoba's identity. At this moment, the captain reported back to his superiors, who ordered him to eliminate any evidence of the incident as it was merely a test. As for Aoba, he was also set for deletion, and he could only nod in agreement. The captain informed him that it was now 2088, and Japan had been part of the Free Federation for a year. The Federation had declared war on the Republic, and the battle had escalated to unimaginable heights as Aoba witnessed. Dio was skeptical of Aoba's claim of having travelled from 75 years in the future, and continued to point his gun, pressing him for the truth. A teammate intervened, and the captain called him over, retrieving Hina's hairpin without a second thought. Meanwhile, Alfred, the commander of the Republic, reflected on the day's battle and the sacrifice of one of his members, believing it was not in vain, as they had uncovered the secret behind the Federation's new robots. The captain expressed his belief that Aoba was indeed from the past due to several factual details, and he had no intention of eliminating him. Instead, he decided to keep Aoba on board without holding him captive. Dio inquired if the captain wished to allow Aoba to pilot the robot again, to which the captain replied that it would depend on the situation. If necessary, he would let both of them operate together. They then set off for a new base in North America. Aoba was directed to stay within specific areas of the ship as it was quite large, and if he got lost, it would be difficult to find him. They departed while the enemy was preparing for their second attack. Years ago, a new form of energy was discovered, changing the world entirely. The Republic, thanks to this abundant energy source, had expanded into an empire conquering neighbouring countries. Countries opposed to the empire formed the Federation, researching synchronization mechanisms. However, the experimental process caused too many casualties, leading to a halt. Recently, they resumed this research covertly. As Aoba was being briefed, he dozed off, exhausted from everything he had been through. The girl explaining the situation was a mechanic, and she felt disheartened that he fell asleep during her detailed explanations. As a technician, she helped Aoba learn more about the happenings aboard the ship. He apologized for his fatigue, having endured so much. She then took Aoba to see the robot he had piloted. This robot closely resembled the one Hina had piloted. The mechanic informed him that this was the original model with no duplicates. She also mentioned that the chief engineer was currently adjusting the robot's data to be compatible with Aoba. Aoba pondered whether he would have to pilot this machine again. However, the mechanic was uncertain, as the higher-ups had ordered adjustments. Dio approached, advising her not to lead a civilian like Aoba around this area, which was a military secret. Suddenly, an alarm sounded, prompting everyone to rush out, leaving Aoba confused and unsure of where to go. Reports indicated that 3 enemies and 2 others were heading into battle. Aoba hurried to the launch area, stunned by what he saw. Dio's group soon encountered the enemy, splitting up to handle each foe individually. Their initial goal was to buy time, and they succeeded in distracting the enemies long enough for the command ship to recharge and prepare for departure. However, the enemy was also ready, pulling back and firing a massive energy beam straight at the command ship. Alfred was the one firing, and he didn't hesitate to unleash several more shots. The ship's engines and wings were hit, but 2 shots were their limit. They decided to attack the ship directly. Dio's team was forced to re-engage to stop them, But the enemy had 4 members, while 2 of Dio's team members were tasked with handling Alfred. Observing Dio's average speed, Alfred concluded that he had not transformed, making victory seem assured. It turns out that the one assigned to ambush the enemy is none other than Hina herself. In this timeline, she charges into close combat with Dio and is considered an elite soldier sent by the Empire. The flagship is beginning to face dire straits. Meanwhile, Aoba receives the notification that he's ready for battle. Captain, despite knowing he's just an ordinary civilian, this is a situation that demands action. Aoba is tired of sitting idly waiting for death to come. When Aoba appears on the battlefield, Dio can't help but throw some jabs before shifting focus back to the synchronization. The synchronization is complete, and it's aimed at him fresh, while Aoba is tasked with fighting Hina. Aoba activates his observation haki, blocking an unexpected strike from Hina, but finds himself at a loss, unable to land a hit, since the observation haki belongs to him, while Aoba is just borrowing it. He still hasn't realized that Hina is his opponent. In a rush, he gets shot down by Dior, who uses a long-range robot instead of engaging in close combat. Now, Aoba is essentially at a standstill as he's accustomed to controlling the robot without needing any skills. Yet Dior shares his knowledge, countering every attack and damaging Hina's robot. When Aoba encounters Hina again, he can't shake the thought that she's an enemy. The tension causes their synchronization to drop, and they're on the verge of breaking their link. Aoba struggles to open the cockpit to rush to Hina's aid, inflicting serious repercussions on Dior. He approaches Hina, wanting to pull her to his side, but the enemy thinks he's trying to capture her, leading to an attack from Dior's ally Lee, who also rushes in to help. Lee urges Aoba to return to the cockpit, suggesting he can take Hina along. But she's still unaware of Aoba's intentions, draws her weapon, and fires back, accidentally triggering the emergency escape mode. Meanwhile, the enemy pulls Hina back, taking a shot that forces her to stand tall to absorb the hit. Both sides retreat, having suffered nearly equal losses. Aoba finds a reason to fight seriously at all costs. Upon returning, he is questioned for opening the cockpit during the fight, resulting in Lee's death. Dior doesn't care that Hina is an AI. He only focuses on 2 things on the battlefield: the enemy and his own troops. Yet the engineer doesn't blame Aoba, as it was his actions that kept the ship alive to reach the supply station. He intends to apologize to Lee. But Lee doesn't hold a grudge against Aoba. After all, he saved them twice, so there's no need to dwell on it. Meanwhile, the Republic orders Hina's arrest, suspecting her as a spy since her name was known by the Federation. The Federation has similar suspicions about Aoba being a Republic agent. The captain decides to keep Aoba out on bail while continuously monitoring him. The location they just landed for refueling is Aoba's former residence, so he asks the robot to take him for a tour. He arrives at what was once his home, only to find it flattened for redevelopment. He considers looking for his sister, but realizes if she were alive, she'd be 88 years old now, so perhaps it's best to let it go. The robot tries to search, but finds no information leading them to Aoba's old school. However, it's completely in ruins due to the war. He heads to the old basketball court and reminisces about Hina asking the robot about her. In a moment of fierce resolve, he decided to meet Hina once more, seeking answers even though he knew the danger that loomed over him after being spotted in the recent battle. It felt utterly reckless, especially in the midst of war. He later returned to the ship, grappling with the thought of abandoning the fight, unwilling to let others suffer because of him. Yet his companions, including his trusty ally, never blamed him. They saw him as their savior instead. Recalling the encouraging words of his friends, he resolved to join the fight. He approached the captain and accepted the role of pilot, knowing it was his only chance to be of use, and perhaps to encounter Hina again. The captain warned him, however, that she might see him as her enemy. Dio was the sole voice of dissent against this plan, but everyone else supported Aoba's return to piloting the robot, much to Dio's irritation. Soon, Aoba was promoted to the rank of lieutenant and went to meet Rota, who had information for him. Rota advised him not to force synchronization again, warning that both his and Dio's brains could suffer severe damage. That night, the captain felt fortunate that Aoba had chosen to return. Otherwise, he might have had to eliminate him to protect national secrets. The next morning, just as they set off, an urgent announcement came in. A cargo ship had been attacked by the forces of the Republic. They immediately prepared to assist. Rota informed Aoba that synchronization time was limited to just 6 minutes, so they needed to act quickly. Dio seemed to follow orders, albeit reluctantly, as he did not enjoy the prospect of synchronizing with Aoba. Their attempts at synchronization faltered due to a lack of mutual trust and emotional connection, forcing them to engage in standard combat. However, Dio recognized the emblem on the attack ship. It belonged to his family. They had no choice but to assist Dio in rescuing his family. In a moment of emotional turmoil, he reached out to Dio, pledging to help protect his loved ones. With their trust renewed, they synchronized and swiftly cut through the enemy forces, separating the enemy ship from Dio's. In that moment, the command ship opened fire on the enemy vessel, escorting Dio's ship safely to the harbour. Dio rushed to reunite with his family, but his father urged him not to waste time there. The following day, Aoba, still unclear about Dio's situation, was approached by Rota and another individual named AI. They would be training him from that day forward. After hearing the announcement, Aoba considered leaving, but Rota stopped him, revealing it was just an excuse to take him on a tour while they cleaned up. Meanwhile, Hina had been released, and Alfred wanted her to prove her loyalty through action. The man named Bison seemed particularly interested in Hina. As Aoba was forced to clean the ship, he found himself frustrated. Suddenly, he spotted Dio's younger sister trying to approach, but she couldn't enter, prompting Aoba to go down and ask her what was wrong. Dio's sister hesitated to meet him, fearing he was still angry after their father's words the day before. She also felt guilty knowing Dio had fought in their hometown and couldn't save their mother, and her own leg was injured. Dio held himself responsible for that incident, which made him avoid seeing his family. He even pretended to have a stomach ache in front of the soldiers to help his sister sneak in with a maid. Aoba then went to the command room to inquire about Dio's whereabouts, only to find they were celebrating Aoba's induction. They explained that Aoba's cleaning duties were to keep him away from the festivities. They called for Dio to come to the command room to speak with his sister, but suddenly an alarm sounded signaling a battle. On the sea, the forces of the Federation were being overwhelmed by the Republic's numbers, necessitating immediate reinforcements. As Dio met with his sister, she forgave him, insisting he was not at fault. She told him to ignore any blame, which eased Dio's conscience, but just as they were about to leave, enemy forces arrived, led by none other than Alfred. They had to change their strategy and fight at the base first before proceeding to reinforce. They decided to synchronize Dio with Aoba to turn the tide, but the two were quite far apart. The command ship had to retreat from the combat zone, but they soon found themselves surrounded with no escape routes. The captain had to make the tough call to abandon the base and flee. Dio rushed to provide assistance, urging Aoba to stop lingering with Hina, as they had received orders to retreat from the base. They synchronized their movements, bolting forward as the command ship created a shield for their escape. No matter how many shots the enemy fired, they were deflected. They bought enough time for the ship's cannons to charge and fire back at the enemy flagship. The commander on the Republic side fired back in desperation and nearly lost control as the command ship barreled toward her. Yet the collision never occurred, and the Federation managed to maintain their forces. Once back on the ship, everyone could finally breathe easy, and Dio expressed his gratitude to Aoba for helping his sister. Meanwhile, the Federation's military continued to secretly study synchronization, despite facing backlash from many. However, the military council remained calm, believing the people would eventually see the necessity of their actions. The captain soon informed command about their plan to film a promotional segment to evade charges of illegal synchronization research. Additionally, this would help them recruit more soldiers. For the promotional content, both Dio and Aoba would take on leading roles. However, when the film crew arrived, Aoba was denied participation, and they invited another individual named Form to partner with Dio for the promotional video. They then went to the command room to assess which areas were off limits. Despite knowing it was work, Dio displayed his discontent with the whole affair. Rota, on the other hand, was invited to check out the handsome crew members since they were there to film a commercial. Though it was all part of the job, Dio wore a reluctant mask, uneasy about the rules of where they could and couldn't go. Meanwhile, Bim's friend dragged her along to check out the handsome guys since they were here filming a commercial. And sure enough, the guys they met were nothing short of eye candy. Slowly, Bim got caught up in it, volunteering to be the film crew's guide for a tour of the ship. Alba's team came looking for them, curious, since Diallo and Form seemed to know each other already. Form shared that he used to be classmates with Diallo, and no matter the subject, Form always scored top marks. He was easygoing, a stark contrast to Dior's guarded nature. But when Alba spoke ill of Form, Diallo's expression soured. He was quick to show his dislike and walked away bluntly, stating that he hated people who weren't serious and who stirred up trouble. Meanwhile, the captain was busy making preparations before leaving the base. The new base in Hawaii was now under Alfred's control, and he was praised for successfully securing it. Hina was happily hanging out with her comrades from the Republic faction. The commercial shoot moved along with Bim hosting and guiding interviews from one spot to another. But when Dior ran some checks from one place to another, he noticed something strange. Dior had altered the synchronization signals ever since battling alongside Alba. He was immediately called in for a test, and surprisingly Dior and Alba's connection was unusually smooth, almost like they were perfectly in tune. So, for now, they decided to synchronize Alba and Form together, then digitally merge Dior and Form's images in place of Alba's. Dior was essentially replacing himself in Alba's performance. The link between Alba and Form was flawless, like an unbreakable network just before New Year's. Their speed and harmony were so unreal, it burned with jealousy. Form couldn't understand what Alba really was. To be able to sync with someone he just met twice was baffling. Suddenly, a volley of missiles tore through the sky. The attackers were an elite squad sent by the Republic, far tougher than the usual foes. Their mission was clear: destroy the Federation's synchronization system at all costs. Since it was Alba and Form's first sync, their combat wasn't sharp. Even Dior was rendered useless, forced to pilot a subpar robot with his offhand. The enemy unleashed a barrage that made Alba's movements a dance of dodging bombs without any observation Haki to rely on. Alba was quickly herded into the enemy's firing line, forcing him to charge in for rescue. Dior broke through the enemy's formation, forcing them to retreat. Returning from battle, the commercial shoot was finally wrapped up. Just one more minute, and they'd be heading back. The finale felt a bit childish, but Dior had to see it through, duty called. The commercial crew returned, but Dior was reassigned here as a backup pilot, a reserve role. The elite squad leader had witnessed the power of synchronization firsthand and understood why Alfred hadn't yet crushed Alba's crew. The Republic even shot a retaliatory commercial, with their commander vowing that next time the elite forces would attack with full force. As the Republic chased them down, their tracking signals suddenly vanished. The captain ordered a landing near a few islands to hide from detection, though the safety would only last 2 hours at most. Nature, however, sided with them. A storm was brewing and was set to collide with the elite squad within an hour. The storm would block the enemy's robots from scanning, giving them a brief but precious respite. The chance to escape for the Alliance fleet ship was slipping away, as reconnaissance was urgently underway, only to be disrupted by Captain Cho jamming their signals, delaying their search. The pilot squad aboard the ship soon spoke up. They praised Captain Cho as a genius, noting that in his entire career, not a single ship under his command had been lost. Lee had also recovered, so he came to greet the new crew member from and casually reminded them to follow Visa because she had urgent business. At this moment, the enemy had exhausted all resources in their desperate attempt to pinpoint the League's location. Yet their efforts bore no fruit, only exposing their own position. Visa wanted to address synchronization issues, having discovered that Alba could synchronize with everyone, including the basic sync waves that differed from the rest. She showed Dior, and from how they had changed when syncing with Alba, leading them to a startling conclusion: synchronizing with Alba was a double-edged sword. This process didn't require prior training, but it altered the sync waves of both parties, severing their connection with any AI other than Alba. However, if they limited the connection and allowed From and Dior to resynchronize, they could gradually revert to their original state. But suddenly their ship was detected by the enemy. As their new vessel prepared to engage, she ordered him to halt and send coordinates to the elite unit, forbidding any interference, as it was a command he couldn't contest. The elite squad immediately took to the skies upon receiving the news, aware that the two sides would not join forces. They seized the opportunity to decide which pairs would synchronize, and Alba was once again sent into battle. They wouldn't risk having Alba and From test their skills against each other on the battlefield, especially since one of them would be piloting that outdated model. making it futile to expect much from it. 5 robots launched into battle against an enemy force of 10, splitting into 5 to assault the command ship, forcing the 2 to return and protect it. But the enemy had lured them into this trap to overwhelm them, as 2 were held back by others. Left with no choice, Dior and Alba decided to synchronize, relying on each other to fend for themselves. Surrounded by mines, they unleashed their trump card, striking through the enemy lines to eliminate any foe that crossed their path. What had once been a double-edged sword turned out to be exactly what Dior needed to enhance their capabilities. They successfully took down 9 enemies, swiftly finishing off the commander with a decisive blow. The remaining 5, now leaderless, were quickly dispatched. As Dior and Alba released their synchronization, Alfred saw an opportunity to attack, preparing his forces to engage their ship and forcing them to retreat. Captain Cho dove straight into the storm to retreat and avoid losses, refusing to chase after them. But to prove his innocence, he pursued the elite, as his comrade followed closely to the League's ship. Dior managed to return safely, but Alba was held back by Hina. As the 3 comrades tried to clear a path, they came under fire from the enemy ship, forcing them to pull back. Hina and Alba clashed, missing the chance to board the ship, and plummeted downwards. When Alba regained consciousness, he found himself on a deserted island and set off to search for Hina. At that moment, she was still unconscious and about to drown as water flooded the cockpit. Both factions wanted to rescue their people, but their commanders forbade it. The Republic still deemed Hina a traitor unworthy of saving, while Alba couldn't act due to the severe weather. Yet he knew that despite the orders, Dior would still go for her. Hina stirred awake and held Alba at gunpoint, venturing to inspect the damaged robot. It was indeed broken, and her supplies had drifted away. She reluctantly approached Alba's robot to commandeer his gear and take control of him. Pointing her weapon at him, she threatened to take him back to the Republic for questioning, to clear her name, insisting he had brought her here. However, she wasn't the Hina he knew, making discussions futile. At that moment, Dior was still determined to search, and From informed him that their ship was sending signals to retrieve them, and they had to get back at all costs. Meanwhile, the elite forces were searching for the body of the elite commander from earlier. During this time, Alba sat reflecting on Hina, when suddenly his robot collapsed, sealing off their escape route. Both AIs had no choice but to cooperate, digging at the cave's entrance to escape. After a long struggle with no progress, they decided to dig higher. Alfred's search team confirmed the commander's death and began looking for Hina. As time slipped away, Hina was running out of air and had succumbed. Alba, however, was determined and managed to break through, forcing him to dive down to save Hina. Alba successfully brought her to the surface and quickly sought shelter. Suddenly, his robot powered back on and received a call from Dior. He gave Dior their location, but feigned a loss of signal when asked about Hina, allowing her to message the coordinates to her teammates. The next morning, after the storm had passed, Dior was on his way to retrieve Alba. He returned her hairpin, urging her to escape quickly. He revealed his name before meeting Dior, who scolded him for cutting off communications, but he used the interference as an excuse. Upon returning to the ship, Hina was also retrieved by her comrades. However, Alba was left with no leads to return to the past. The vice commander called him, having heard about the close call with the lost robot, but insisted it wouldn't matter. Suddenly, the doctor called, announcing his imminent arrival on the ship, as the head of Sync Research contacting them was trivial. When he arrived, everyone welcomed him, and he requested Dior and Alba to demonstrate their synchronization. Alba was unaware he was an AI, so the doctor took the time to explain. He was the one who developed synchronization technology and was Visa's mentor, although it was Visa who created the machine that enabled their synchronization. The synchronization test was activated, and both synchronized for a full 6 minutes. At the end of the process, Dior realized Alba had lied about actually meeting Hina on the island. Yet Alba had lost hope because the Hina he knew no longer existed. Dior finally understood that his friend's despair was causing him to lash out in criticism, displaying his vulnerability. Alba, feeling irritated, brought up his sister, and the two ended up in a fistfight. Their teammates had to intervene and ultimately locked both of them in a cell to cool off. The doctor then visited fully, believing in Alba's origins from the past based on his hypothesis. Just like the synchronization technology, it's entirely feasible. The scientist has announced that the technology for synchronization hasn't yet been widely adopted, lacking convincing evidence. He also mentioned a republic that currently poses a threat with this technology. This is due to a student of his who is also a peer of Hina having betrayed them and fled to the republic. This individual is Dr. Han, and he has now assigned a mission to Commander Bison. She approached Hina to inquire how she had contacted them. Hina lied, claiming she had secretly sent messages through Alba's robot, but could only do so briefly before being whisked away by others. She barely managed to escape. Bison cautiously trusted her and set off on the mission. Alba and Dior were immediately alerted. As a result, they were released to join the battle. The commander was hesitant about deploying both of them in this situation, but once on the battlefield, they set aside their personal grudges to focus on the fight. Synchronization was successfully completed. They stood together firing missiles to allow the ship to recharge its shields after the initial barrage. Fueled with anger towards Alba, the enemy aimed at him, releasing a hail of fire. Dior wanted to assist, but was held back by the enemy commander and Alfred. Their inability to reduce the missiles led to the shield couldn't block everything, and Dr. Han Kia's plane had taken a hit. Though wounded, he hid it from everyone, believing he was fine. The enemy kept launching missiles, and no one knew how many they had left. Suddenly, they realized the enemy was stalling for time until synchronization ran out. And just as Dr. Han predicted, the maximum sync time was 6 minutes, with just over a minute left now. Despite their arguments, this tension fueled them both to push harder, unwilling to lose. Together, they cleared all the missiles, but time was down to 10 seconds. Even after 10 seconds passed, the synchronization remained. The enemy was shocked, thinking it was a miscalculation, but the time exceeded 7 minutes, stunning their leader and distracting her just long enough for Dio to strike. He slashed through her robot before sync ended. Luckily, the robot didn't explode, and she was rescued just in time by a friend. They then retreated as Dr. Han, satisfied with their performance, allowed himself to rest. Meanwhile, Han's side replaced the leader, in other words, fired her and sent reinforcements. The reinforcements were none other than Hina's father. The next day, Dr. Han's funeral was held, attended by Dio's father as well. That day, Dio, Alba and Mai were granted a day off, prompting many to ask them to buy things. The list was so long, it stretched for miles. As the trio set off, Captain Cho met with the Commander-in-Chief, who approved the synchronization process, but wanted to check the results first. Meanwhile, as the group bought a mountain of supplies, Dio revealed his plan to reconcile with his father, but Dio's outburst told them he didn't want help and stormed off alone. Unsure how to handle this, the others continued on until Dio accidentally ran into his sister. At the same time, Visa spoke to Captain Cho about Han Kia calling him a true genius. She had to admit defeat too, though she managed to create the sync device, something Han hadn't made yet. If this device fell into Han's hands, he would elevate it to a whole new level. Han was now eager to steal Visa's technology and improve it, confident the Republic's tech would make that task easy. Meanwhile, Hina's father entrusted her to Alfred's care, but soon they faced a mission: infiltrate the Federation's new base, steal the sync designs, and if possible, capture 2 robots. Hina hesitated to join, feeling guilty toward Dio after he helped her. Alba, hearing Dio's story from his sister, was even more determined to talk to the 2 brothers' father, but the sister doubted their father would listen to a stranger and begged them not to cause trouble. Dio encountered his old caretaker and then faced his father. Though they ate in silence, neither willing to break the tension, the father finally thanked Dio for protecting the family at their old base and expressed concern for Dio and Alba's condition. Hina's father has entrusted her to Alfred for training, but soon they have a mission: an audacious infiltration into the Federation's new base to steal the designs for synchronization, and, if fortune favors them, they might even capture 2 robots. Hina, however, feels a gnawing uncertainty about joining in. Dio can't shake off the weight of guilt he feels towards Alba after receiving his help. Hearing about Dio from his own sister fuels Alba's desire to speak with their father. But his sister believes their father wouldn't heed the words of a stranger, so she pleads with him to keep things low-key. Dio then encounters an old butler, leading to an awkward reunion with his father. Despite sharing a meal, neither of them is willing to break the silence. Eventually, their father thanks Dio for protecting their family during the incident at the old base. He has also learned about Dio and Alba's current situation, believing that his son should abandon the soldier's life as soon as possible. After all, Albert is just a civilian, and if something were to happen to him, Dior would be left powerless without a partner. Yet Dior believes that Albert is not as easy to defeat as one might think. Although Dior finds many qualities in Albert annoying, he has never lost hope in him on the battlefield. Understanding this, their father expresses his concern for Dior. It becomes evident to him that Dior has changed. By the end of the day, a new understanding begins to dawn. The group from BA had taken his little sister home when they accidentally ran into him here. The two siblings talked and their bond was mended, influenced by their father's actions allowing Dio to finally open up. The next day, the friends were once again subjected to testing for the commander, who was utterly amazed by how minimal the latency was. Yet the two young men still found themselves bickering over trivial discrepancies. That night, soldiers from the Republic and Heine stealthily approached the base, changing into disguises to infiltrate. Meanwhile, several civilian planes had disguised themselves as cargo planes to request permission to land after being set ablaze. The soldiers, rushing to extinguish the flames, inadvertently provided cover for the enemy to sneak in. Once they successfully infiltrated Alfred, detonated all the planes, releasing combat robots to attack while the chaos ensued. The Heine faction planned to steal supplies, and upon hearing the news, their captain summoned Albert's entire group, wishing to split into teams. With only 8 robots attacking, it seemed suspicious. The BA team, possessing synchronization capabilities, would retrieve the robots, while the other group would assist in eliminating the infiltrators. Dio armed Albert since he couldn't predict what might happen next. After some time, the Hina soldiers successfully reached the 2 robots and began the hacking process. Yet Hina, overwhelmed with guilt, was struck by a shot from an engineer, and her father stepped in to take the hit, getting injured. Soldiers quickly arrived, blocking the only escape route. They were forced to hold their ground. Hina and her father were taken to a temporary room for safety. He knew he didn't have much time left, and revealed to Hina that she wasn't his biological child, but an adopted one he found on the battlefield, after being separated due to a robot crashing. Hina's father wanted her to leave, so he could have one last glorious moment. Heartbroken, she departed, only to run into BA again, realizing that she was not the Hina Alba knew, and not the daughter her father believed her to be. Forced to hold their ground, Hina's father took her to a room to hide. Knowing his time was short, he revealed to Hina she wasn't his biological daughter, but a child he had adopted after finding her on the battlefield. Separated by a fallen robot, blocking their path, Hina's father urged her to leave so he could have one last glorious moment. Heartbroken, she left only to meet Alba. Both were lost, unsure of their true selves. Alba knew he wasn't Hina's biological son either. When Alba heard of Hina's disappearance, he immediately went searching. Alba explained to Hina that she was indeed herself, and if she wished, could return with him. He promised to explain everything to the others, and they might accept her. But Bison appeared, accusing her of betrayal against the father who had risked everything to protect her, shaking her resolve. Bison then threatened to shoot Alba, but Dio and From arrived just in time to drive Bison back, forcing him to let Hina escape. Meanwhile, countless missiles rained down, forcing the command ship to raise its shields. Suddenly, Alba and Dio's 2 synchronized robots were stolen, and Captain Cho ordered them to be shot down. Alba was furious because Gina was aboard. Believing Hina was in danger, he was determined to rescue her at all costs. Knowing this might be his last battle, Dio took 2 old sync model robots and joined Alba to reclaim what was theirs, still holding the advantage in synchronization. Visa warned them of the danger, but both ignored her and synced illegally, suffering severe feedback. They watched their robots fall, but pressed on, charging into the fight with Bison. Their synchronization waves spiraled out of control, allowing both to glimpse each other's memories. Bison seemed to sense this shift as well, but the sync quickly shattered. Hina was called back, and despite their desperate chase, they failed to catch her. When her stats were checked, both were stable, but Dio's sync increasingly drifted from the base frequency, while his bond with Alba grew ever stronger. Later, they had a heartfelt talk, finally clearing the air. Hina was interrogated about protecting Alba. She tried to explain her past, but they dismissed it, insisting only Bison could have saved her if the previous night's events leaked. Dr. Hand summoned her for a pilot synchronization test, giving her time to think afterward, but he deceived her, injecting a mind-stabilizing drug during the trial. Meanwhile, Dio informed the command center that she had come from the past. Hina was the only clue to uncovering how Alba travelled through time. That night, Han told Alfred about Tina's situation. Cho, who volunteered as an allied sync pilot to avenge his father, was confronted, but as I said, his mind was controlled. He only obeyed the twisted lies Han fed him. Han cunningly used Bison to lure Cho into becoming a pilot. Despite the brainwave mismatch with Hina making synchronization, agonizing Cho still volunteered, enduring the painful process. Meanwhile, Aiba's squad was dispatched after discovering a colossal cannon built by the Republic. At first, they thought it wasn't an immediate threat, but suddenly it began charging energy this morning, sparking serious concern from the higher-ups. So, a new sync robot was completed and ready for battle the moment it arrived. Dio wanted Alba to understand that he had something precious to protect, and if he had to choose, it would be them, not Hina. So when the time came, Alba could do whatever she wished. The enemy detected the Federation ship heading toward the town. The commander laid out a plan to counter Bison and Hina, who was now prepped and ready to pilot Sync, her mind like a programmed machine. The enemy loaded shells into the cannon and fired, blasting straight through the mountain. The shots obliterated the ships in their path before they could even react. The command ship barely escaped, but still had to retreat. Meanwhile, Alba quickly mobilized with his troops to attack the ship carrying Dior's and Alba's sync robots, both still not arrived yet, causing them both anxiety. Hina and Bison stormed the battlefield, charging headlong to destroy the Federation ships. The enemy readied another shot, so the deputy commander ordered their team to disable the cannon. Alba boarded the two first-generation sync robots to carry out the mission. Despite being forbidden to sync because the robots weren't fully repaired, Alba proceeded. Hina experienced a shock that nearly triggered her memories, but the helmet kept her unconscious. Bison and Hina managed to sync eventually, but mid-sync, Hina suddenly halted, recalling something. However, Dr. Han intensified control, forcing her back into unconsciousness. Bison charged forward with the new sync robot. Both AIs instantly synced to fight. Seeing the two synced robots charging the Federation forces swiftly counterattacked. Pilots on the enemy side lost their advantage, and the deputy commander reported that one of their pilots was being forcibly controlled. They saw an opportunity to exploit. Alba recognized this risky move and decided he would be the one to awaken Hinata. Both disconnected their sync so Alba could contact Hina directly. He called out to her, showing his face, and miraculously, Hina woke up. Her sync was immediately cut off. Using this opening, she and Alba rushed to disable the cannon. On the way, Alba and Dio were stopped by Doji. Hunter seized Hina to reassert control, but she fought back fiercely. Alba took a daring risk, signaling to sync with both of them. The sync succeeded with an even higher rate than Dior's. Together, they unleashed a combined awakening attack to block the enemy's powerful cannon blast. The impact created a spatial tunnel, once again sucking Bison inside. Hina realized that if Bison was pulled like that, he would travel back in time and kill Alba. Without hesitation, she lunged forward to follow him through the rift. This moment marked a desperate gamble, a battle not just for survival, but for the fate of their intertwined destinies across time. Alba tried to stop him, but Dior held her back. He had fully plunged back into the past. It took until the third hour for him to realize the cruel truth. It was Hina herself trapped in a spatial loop, and he had never once been able to stop or save her from it. Then, awakening with clarity, just as Hina was about to rush into Bison, he dashed forward to save her. She didn't resist. Instead, she flew to his side. Together, they held onto Hina and launched their full power straight at Bison. The loop was finally broken. The Allies quickly took down the cannon and gained the upper hand. Hina asked Alba why he didn't dive into the vortex to return, but he believed there would be other chances later. Leaving now would mean someone would be left